Hello everyone, how are you today? This is Kathy from the Daily Marker, and there's a Waffle Flower blog hop, and there's some exciting new product. This is what I created with the new stuff, and here's some swatches that I made. These stamp sets, they're called color swatches and color wheel. How perfect, right? And so I want to show you how I swatched this out and how I watercolored this flower. So I'll show you that in the video. This is the color wheel I made. It was so much fun just working with color this way. And then this was like a new stamp set where you could kind of play with things that you've learned. So I did some color swatches with some Copic markers. I was on the road and I played around. And then here I am applying on the shirt one of these swatches that I did, and I'm just sharing that on my blog. So here we go. So my watercolors here, I already have labeled, thanks to Christina Werner. She came to my house one day. So I'm squirting some water in my palette here, and I wanted to start, so these top 4 swatches, I'm going to swatch what I'm going to use for the background. Now, when you're doing these swatches, you put the concentrated color first, then you dip the brush half in, dab it off, and then you repeat. So that's what I'm doing on all these swatches here. And that way you get a diluted coloration as you go further down the swatch. So these colors I'm going to play with on my background. I'm kind of using this as the stamped image with the swatches on the same thing. It's just kind of like a work piece. Last night I was up till 3 working on this, and I had the perfect name to use for this. So anyway, we'll just come up with that later. So now I'm working on the colors that I'll be using for the flower. And I'm using each square as the dilution for the flower now. So I'm dipping into the paint, and then I will dip my brush half in the water and then repeat. And I sped this up because I wanted to make it so it was quicker for you to watch. I know you got lots of other videos to watch. So I'm diluting each one, and this is going faster now. And that way you can see the color variation that you get from each color here. Don't ask me what colors these are. I have it listed, but I don't think that's what's important. These stamp sets are great to play, to discover what colors you have, what colors you create with diluting them, what colors you can create when using the color wheel. And what is this thing called? The tints, the hues, the tones with this dot formation thing and the color wheel stamp. Now, to be honest, while you're watching me put down this color, I'm wetting my area, and then I'm bringing in the purples and the blues, and I'm kind of mixing on my paper. It's wet enough, and it's mixing there and just flowing on the paper. I'm not mixing them on my palette. So while I do this, I'm just going to explain. So Nina from the owner of Waffle Flower. I think she was an engineer, is an engineer. She's incredible, and she's learned to love to color. And so she's creating more stamps that you can color. And because she's an engineer and the way she thinks, she wants to know more. She wants to know everything there is to know, and in an organized fashion, like with color swatching and dilutions and pigments and all that. And for me personally, that overwhelms me a little bit. That works for some people, and for some people it overwhelms. So I want to show you how I'm using these stamps if you're the kind of person that gets overwhelmed. I honestly, truly think these are an addition to every craft room. It's fabulous to have these swatches. All you do is stamp them. You can die cut them. You can put them in your palettes. And then this is a color study. Yay, it came to me. So this is kind of like a color study. And then I can put it on my bullet board for inspiration. And like, do I want to use these colors? Do I want to dilute them? Do I want a soft look? So I'm calling this a color study. And it's not going to be a card. I also think these swatches would be great to use as a background, like a really subtle, kind of like a stencil, just a very subtle background with some no-line ink, and then you put the die cut on top, and it would be gorgeous. Honestly, I didn't have time to do that. I spent a lot of time on the swatches. So that's my story about the swatches. So when you watch Waffle Flower and Nina and lots of the others, they're going to be more of the engineer kind with these swatches and everything that you can do, and you'll learn so much. But don't get overwhelmed. You can come back to me and say, you know what? If you just play, you don't have to pay attention to the tones and the hues and all that. If you want to learn that, that's awesome. But you don't need to get color variation and interest in what you're doing. So while I do this, you can see that I'm adding some darker color to the nooks and crannies, I like to call it, more where the lines intersect, and then I'll blend that out with some plain water. So while I'm doing that, I'm just doing the same thing on every petal. Let me just talk about what I talk about on my road trips. And I was just at Stamp Junkies. They had a function. They're a Facebook group of women who just love stamping, and it's a great supportive group, just like the Daily Marker Coloring Challenges. And I was on my road trips. I talk about how I don't pay attention to the color families. When I'm using markers, I don't look at the numbers. I don't look at the names. And I don't pay attention to where the shadows are coming from. And I talk about that in my videos and stuff. But that's very freeing to a lot of people. So I just wanted to mention that here. So if you get overwhelmed with all the awesomeness that you can do with these swatches and the color wheels, you can also just play and not worry about that. And that's what I'm doing. I want to show you that you don't always have to follow the rules and stuff. And later, I'll just touch on, at the end, the Copic swatching that I did as well. So I'm just working on, now if your paper's wet enough, there's that balance between if your paper's too wet or if it's wet enough where you can continue to add color. And that's something you just have to play and experiment with. So I have the right amount of wetness here, and I can continue to add color and a little bit more depth in those little nooks and crannies. And it doesn't get muddy or it doesn't bleed. And you might notice that I kind of jumped from, when I first started, it was like every other petal. So I want to give it a little bit of time to dry so it's not going to run into the other leaf. And if you get your paper really, really wet, don't worry about it. There's always a solution. Just grab your heat gun, dry that paper a little bit, and add a little more water and just start over. Or experiment how wet can you get it and what you can do with that. Now, I've learned a new term in the watercolor world. It's called glazing. So when your project is completely dry, glazing is when you go back and you add another layer of color. And I've always done this, but I didn't know what it was called. I'm taking a watercoloring class locally, and it's way too advanced. There's not a lot of explanation, but I did pick up that. So, and boy, does she get her paper wet. I mean, she uses really thick paper, but her brush is so wet, she just splashes it on the floor and just goes with it. But she's not using stamped images, and you can't really do that when you're using a stamped image. She's like a free-flowing artist, but it's been very enlightening. Okay, so now I'm just moving on to leaves. I'm just putting that base layer of color, and now I have like an army green. I'm just adding a concentrated color to where the petals touch the stem there. And then I'll use some water just to blend that out. Later I'll add some white accents on this when it's completely dry. Also, we ran to New York. We're 4 hours from New York. So I did the background, and then I came back the next day and finished the flower. My fingers look ratchet. It was a 4-hour drive, and literally the entire time I was filling my markers. And like we'd go over a bump, and then I'd spill on my hands, and my hands were such a wreck, and I just cannot get what you see off my fingers. So I apologize. I'm just grateful it's not brown, so it doesn't look like dirt. It just doesn't look good. So I wanted to play with the color wheel, and Nina, before she sent us these stamps, she showed us the right way to use this, and she's so organized. She sent this a few weeks ago, and I forgot, and then I just was like, you can watch the right way, and then you can watch that you don't always. Well, there's really not a right way. You can make it your way. And I really love swatching colors and watching how when you dip the brush halfway and then get that water off, how each dilution kind of creates a different color. And she'll explain how the color wheel works and everything. But this would be a great background as well. Now, I mentioned I was going to New York, so this is how these are the markers I had to refill. It shows you that I do color plucking. And then I took, in our hotel room when my husband was taking a nap, I was able to play with some of the markers. And here's the swatches that I did during that time frame. And in the car on the way home, I was just playing with the colors. And like I say, I don't pay attention to the color families or any of that. I like to, if you let the alcohol in the marker do its job and you color mash it enough, the colors eventually blend. And so these were what I had to refill. So these were the colors that I had to work with. And out came some cool color combinations. So here, at 3 in the morning, I wanted to show you that one swatch I have the pen pointing to is how I applied that one swatch to the shirt. And then this particular piece here, this was done with watercolors. And the great thing about swatching is you feel empowered. You just feel like you know your colors more and empowered to use more and blend more. So I did this after swatching the color wheel, and I just kind of mixed on the paper, and I'll probably go back and glaze some areas of this, add a little bit more intense color to little nooks and crannies. Maybe I'll do some patterns on the shirt, and so I'm not done with this, but it was just a very free-form, artistic, playing around coloring session. And that's what this whole release is about, is getting to know your colors, playing around, just exploring. Don't worry about the rules. So check out my blog, thedailymarker.com. I know there's a giveaway. Thank you for watching, and just get out there and play. Have a great day. Okay, bye.